All right, hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still somewhat on a somewhat staggered return, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster Season 6, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Crime, mystery, and private eyes are often on my mind, so it's a thrill for me to sit down tonight with our guest, REED FARREL COLEMAN. Called a hard-boiled poet by NPR's Maureen Corrigan, Reed is a New York Times best-selling author of 31 novels, including 6 in the Robert B. Parker Jesse Stone series. A former executive vice president of the Mystery Writers Association, he's also a 4-time recipient of the Shamus Award, 2-time Thriller Award nominee, and 4-time Edgar Award nominee. Welcome, Reed.
Hello. Hello.
All right, good to see you. All right, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for me or Michael in the for Reed in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. Okay, Reed. So as we always do, we're going to start at the beginning. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Madison Park Hospital on Kings Highway in Brooklyn, and I grew up in the Sheepshead Bay, Brighton Beach, Coney Island area of Brooklyn.
All right. So we were just talking about this offline. I have a lot of family from Brooklyn, and I lived there for a while myself. But the Brooklyn of today is in many ways vastly different than the Brooklyn of yesteryear. So what was it like for you back then?
Well, I've often said that New York City is not one city. It's 1,000 cities, and Brooklyn isn't, monolithic. Like the area of Brooklyn I grew up in was a mile away from the ocean. So, part of where I grew up was like a fishing village. Sheepshead Bay is like a fishing village. Part of it was very immigrant-oriented Brighton Beach, and part of it was a dilapidated amusement park, Coney Island. And the Brooklyn I grew up in was kind of dangerous. I always describe it as a place that was, and it wasn't. It was a place that was once, but was no more. It was the place where the Dodgers had moved from. Coney Island had seen its glory days. The glory of Brooklyn was past. So I grew up in a place where the people older than me thought it was oh my God, you should have seen Brooklyn when it was X.
Right.
And I grew up, and I think for a crime writer and for a writer, I actually grew up in a time when it was better. It was better because it once was much better than is.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Because even really, Brooklyn didn't become Brooklyn until the Brooklyn Bridge, was built, and it kind of changed it was an island unto itself. It was its own piece, and then it kind of got interconnected, and it had a boom for 30 or so years, and then it started to kind of migrate out a bit. So I'm going to make some assumptions, which I know you're never supposed to do. But were you a Coney Island guy? I mean, did you ride the Cyclone? Eat hot
dogs? Yeah. If this was a more portable camera, I'd show you. I have a painting of the steeplechase, and I have tickets from riding the Cyclone. My friends and I used to get high and go on the Cyclone and never get off. Like, it was 75 cents to ride the first time, and then 50 cents every other ride. So we would just get high and keep riding the Cyclone. So yeah.
So even back then, was the Cyclone, was it still like that rickety, death trap?
You mean rickety, dangerous death trap?
Yes.
Yeah, it was probably worse because, that's when Coney Island was at its low point, when it was really decrepit and falling apart. Right. So yeah, we were taking our lives in our hands, but we were so high, it didn't matter,
My mom used to tell stories about how, they would go down to Coney Island. We were talking before, my mom lived in Williamsburg, and they would go down to Coney Island on the weekend, and just to get a hot dog at Nathan's, the line was, it was like 10 deep everywhere you go. Is that how it was when you were there?
Yeah. I mean, Nathan's still, if you go, at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's still crowded. Yeah. It's a magnet. That was always the thing. Nathan's, the Cyclone, the Wonder Wheel, the parachute jump were all touchstones for me.
Right.
And a lot of my books are set in Coney Island
Right.
because it's such a touchstone for me.
So back then, I mean, for those of us who live or lived in Brooklyn and New York, and know it, but for those who don't, so when you're in Brooklyn, was there what was the sense of being in Brooklyn, coming from Brooklyn, as compared to, the city, Manhattan? Was it sort of like its own world? Was there a competition? Was there a jealousy? What was the sensibility back then?
That's funny. I mean, if you live in New York City, if you live in the outer boroughs,
that's right.
You can refer to Manhattan as the city.
A city, that's right.
It's the city. So I never felt there was a competition. I just felt, Brooklyn was where people like blue collar people and normal people lived.
Right.
And Manhattan was where you went to do exciting stuff.
Right.
Or shopping or go to the museums, or that's what Manhattan was.
Okay.
So Bright Lights, big city for us too.
Right. For sure. So did you have brothers, sisters? Or
I have two older brothers.
So did you guys get along?
Yeah, especially when I got big enough to kick my oldest brother's ass.
Oh, there you go. Nothing really levels a playing field like to knock someone on the dirt.
Yeah. No, my middle brother could still beat the shit out of both of us. But
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, right. It was we got along. We grew up in a 4.5. There were 5 of us. My mom, my dad, my 2 brothers, and myself grew up in a 4.5 room apartment just off Ocean Parkway.
Right.
And we were an interesting family. We were a family of an angry family. Mm. So and which partially led to my writing, but it was funny. Apparently when we moved to this it was a row of garden apartments, and my parents were offered, either the end unit or the middle unit, and they took the middle unit, I think, because it was $10 cheaper a month. But I like to think it was so the whole block could hear us screaming at each other.
So what were your so what did your folks do?
Well, my dad was in the grocery business. He was a grocery store manager. He owned the store for a while. It went bankrupt. But he managed grocery stores my whole life.
Where was the store?
All over the place. He managed Wallbounds. He managed for Key Food. He managed, all the big chains. And my mom worked for the Board of Education of the city of New York.
So your parents, what was their heritage? Like where?
Oh, well, my Russian, Ukraine, it's funny because my kids just did 23andMe, the DNA, and I had done it.
Right.
And when you send it in, you kind of hope, there's something exciting in my background, right? And I'm not joking, my DNA came back 99.6% Ashkenazi Jew. And so that they could point to the street.
Right. Wow.
In the shtetl where my family was from.
Right.
So both sides of my family were apparently from very close together in the country that is now being invaded by Russia.
Yeah, it's great. I know. I have, a lot of Eastern European blood in me too. Russian, Polish, Greek, and Austrian. And although we just found out my sisters did the DNA, and it turns out, even though everyone just assumes I'm Italian, but the name is actually Hebrew. But we just found out that we're supposedly 15% Italian, because back, generations ago, the Jews were slaves in Rome.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the way, we sort of made our way up.
See, you got interesting stuff. I got, my relatives were busy being chased by Cossacks everywhere, and then both sides of the family. So my mom's family came over in 1898. That I know. I don't know when my dad's family came over.
Yeah. I mean, it's common, at least, in my experience, and I know it was true in my family and a lot of other, Jewish, families that came over. There was a lot of, they were not the happiest people.
No.
When they came over, and they, and and it carried over, the generations. It got a little better as the generations went on, but back in the late 1800s into the 1900s, they were tough.
Yeah.
They didn't shy away from letting you know it.
Well, you know what I always find very interesting is look at old wedding photos. Those old black and white photos. Look how many people are smiling. It's like zero.
Zero. That's right.
Yeah, zero.
Did
People are smiling.
Did your dad or any of the family, were they in the military at any point?
My dad was passed the test to be a bomber pilot in World War II. My mom, I love this. My mom said, if you're a pilot, I won't marry you, because that's when, some boring history about World War II is when the 8th Air Force was having 25% casualty rates on every bombing mission. So typical of my father, he said, okay, I won't be a pilot. He became a turret gunner.
Oh, jeez.
What enemy planes aim at.
Right. Oh,
so,
Lord.
Yeah.
But
Luckily for him, he never got sent overseas.
Oh, really?
He punched an officer for saying something anti-Semitic.
Oh,
and got busted down and never went overseas.
But funny, I mean, not funny, but my grandfather on my mom's side was in World War II, and he was paratrooper. He spent some time in North Africa and a few other places, and he was supposedly a boxer in the army. And he was pretty good too, but he also had some bad tendencies, and he clocked someone he wasn't supposed to, and things didn't go well for him.
Yeah.
So there it goes. All right. So when you were a kid, I mean, what were you into? Like, I know you got high and rode the Cyclone.
Right.
What else?
No.
What was your thing?
I was into sports.
Right.
I played stickball, softball, little league. I played a little high school football. I played basketball. I was into sports. I was into sports and poetry. Bizarrely.
Right.
Reading.
Did your friends, how did they take to the poetry side of your personality back then, or did they?
I think my gang of friends were okay with it. It's not, right. I guess because I was a fairly good athlete. I mean, I was no star, but I was a fairly good athlete that, I'd proven myself, somehow as a man. And I have to say, I have to give my friends a lot of credit, and that I had one friend who in 1973 or 4 came out to us as gay because he trusted us. Now people kind of poo-poo that. It's still hard to do.
Right.
But he came out to us as gay. And so I have to give my friends a lot of credit because, in those days, that took a lot of bravery, but it also took your friends being accepting.
Right, for sure.
To do it. And he felt confident enough in us being accepting that he did it. So
that's great.
So, my poetry, not much.
Right. So you were starting to talk about it. So back then, did you grow up? Were you watching cop shows and reading mystery books, or like what?
It's funny is I was not a mystery reader. I was a science fiction guy.
All right. Okay.
Science fiction guy.
All right.
My favorite author was Kurt Vonnegut, and I loved the Rod Serling would put out books, and Alfred Hitchcock would put out. That's the stuff that I read.
Okay. Wow. Excellent.
And so, when I watched the Green Hornet and Time Tunnel and Lost in Space, so I was more of a science fiction guy than a mystery guy. And I read Poe. Okay. I did read Poe.
Okay.
Okay. But it was funny because I've always said, I always viewed mystery novels as the cheesy books on my dad's nightstand with the lurid pictures of half-naked women holding guns.
Right.
So, I was above that.
Right. Excellent. So let me ask you. So I've seen this out there, and I want to hear it from you to see if it's true. So there's a story that one day, I guess when you were a teenager or so, you stumbled upon a guy who'd been shot. Is this true?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I'll try and tell this as briefly as possible,
Go for it.
but it had a profound effect on me, as you can imagine that it did. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was working at a Baskin Robbins in Sheepshead Bay, on Sheepshead Bay Road. And to somewhat describe it, Sheepshead Bay Road bends like an elbow. It comes around and
Right.
bends like this. So I was walking, it was a beautiful summer day. I was walking to work, and I heard a gunshot. And I don't know how I knew it was a gunshot, but I knew it was a gunshot. Didn't sound like a car backfiring. It didn't sound like firecrackers. And like an idiot, I ran towards it and not away from it.
Right.
And so I ran up what is Jerome Avenue off Sheepshead Bay Road, and I got to the post office, and lying in the gutter, half in the gutter, half on the sidewalk, was a man, a middle-aged man with a dime-sized red dot in his abdomen, laying flat down. And a crowd had gathered. I mean, I got there, what must be no more than 10 seconds after he was shot. Like, I saw him fall into the street. And no one did anything. You learn in psychology that the more people there, the less people act, because everybody's waiting for someone else.
Right. Everyone's pointing fingers.
It's like someone was waiting for somebody to say, Simon says,
right.
help them. So he's laying there. Somebody does come over, put something under his head. An ambulance comes, and they take the stretcher out. And this is the days when guys did wear white coats, and came out of the ambulance. They put him on a gurney. They start the Benzie bag, with a breathing.
So just for context, what year was this?
This was 1972, 71, 72. Okay. And his chest starts heaving. And, it's very hard for me to conceive. The guy had the hole in his abdomen was the size of a dime.
And how old were you then about?
I was 15 or 16.
Okay.
And I couldn't conceive of, you watch, cop shows, whatever, The French Connection, whatever, and you think you understand gunshot wounds. And of course,
you don't.
At 15, you really don't. He apparently was bleeding internally like crazy.
Right.
So they start working on him. His chest heaves like, he starts heaving, stops on the gurney. Now, this is the thing that will always stick in my mind forever. When he stops breathing, they do chest compressions, doesn't help. They take off his left sock. He was wearing shorts and had bandlons. They take off his sock and drop it on the sidewalk, and they run a tongue depressor along the bottom of his left foot.
Right.
And I'm like, what the hell is this? And my wife's an occupational therapist, and until I met her, I never understood what that was. And apparently they were testing for the Babinski reflex.
Right.
Only babies and dead people don't have one.
Really?
So they were testing to absolutely make sure he was dead.
Wow.
And then when they took him away, the sock stayed on the sidewalk.
Right.
And so, I suppressed that memory for a long, I went to work, I went home. I'm not sure I talked about it much.
Right.
But it was the talk of the neighborhood for a while. And then I wrote about it for Brooklyn Noir 3, which is true crime stories. Mm. And then the New York Times got in touch with me and did a story on it, because it's still a cold case. It's never been solved.
Really? Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, I had a run-in with, I've seen what a dead person up close in personal life had, and it's a pretty crazy thing. So, how did you internalize that? What sort of an impact did it have on you?
That's funny is, like I said, I kind of compartmentalized it.
Right.
It was like this little incident that happened, but I didn't focus on it. When I'd go to work, that summer, I would think about it a little, but I didn't. And then I have to say, forgot about it.
Right.
It was a thing that I shoved way back and suppressed in the back of my head. But it was always, I think, like when I write, sometimes you're working on your book, but you're not thinking about it up front.
Right.
And I think it weighed on me that for a long time.
Yeah.
And when I started writing crime, it came back, boom, it came back to me.
So I want to ask you something, and it's one of my real pet peeves when it comes, particularly in TV and film, which obviously it's a different medium, but one of my real pet peeves is the way, the hero they're in a gunfight or in a battle and they get shot and they're like, ugh, and they're moving along like a bullet is just sort of like, it's like a bruise.
Right.
I mean, you saw, a dime, it's a hole, and this guy died from this. So how do you, what's your take on that, in any kind of fiction where real violence, the physical impacts of violence are sort of, almost either downplayed or overlooked?
Well, the downplaying, people's art is their art. They can do what they want. I have a few rules for myself. Although there is humor in my books, there is very rarely humor about serious violence. Secondly, I have shot, I shoot occasionally.
Right.
And so one thing that drives me nuts is, do you know how loud a gunshot is? When you shoot, you have to wear ear protection.
Deafening, right?
And it's deafeningly loud. And it kind of bugs me when it doesn't seem loud. You're deaf for a while after you shoot a gun. And depending upon caliber,
right?
A 9mm will do damage depending upon where it hits. A 38 certainly will, and a 45 will knock you down.
Right.
So, I'm not going to criticize how people do what they do, but I try to make it as realistic as I can. And I'll never forget, I went shooting with my son in Arizona one time, and he had never shot a gun, and I hope he never has, never shoots one in anger. And he said, we rented a Glock 19, which is kind of the standard police 9mm, and a 357 Magnum. And he fired him and said, how does anybody live when you get hit with one of these?
Right.
And that's kind of my view, is like, come on, like you get hit with 3 9mm bullets.
That's it. Game over.
Yeah. Depending upon, unless you get incredibly lucky.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think violence is funny.
No.
And I think I try to make it seem as real as it is.
Right. Okay. So speaking of which, so tell me when you first got serious about your writing.
Well, I'd been published as a poet, like from the time I was 15 or 16. In fact, it was funny. I think I'm the only guy who ever quit the football team to become the editor of the literary magazine.
You might be the one.
Right, which is true, actually. It's funny, and I always say in my talks how my kind of dream is to be the most famous author from my high school, except Arthur Miller and Joseph Heller went there.
Oh, get out, really?
Yeah, so there's no shot. No shot.
Oh, you're like, come on, you gotta be kidding me. Come on.
So what happened is, actually, I figured I'd do what most people, what is very traditional with poets, is I'd go to college, I'd get out of college, I'd get a job, and I would publish poetry, which is exactly what happened.
Right. So speaking of, did you ever have, just in the travels, just because of that connection, did you ever get a chance to meet either of those guys?
No. Arthur Miller apparently wrote a letter back to Lincoln High School saying his teachers had set him back many years. So he wasn't coming back for to speak at graduations. No, and I never ran across Heller. So what happened was I got a job working at Kennedy Airport in the cargo area at Kennedy Airport. So, you know, if you ever seen Goodfellas,
Yeah.
those are the guys I work with.
Right.
Seriously.
Oh, so that was you?
I worked with guys who in the cargo area.
No, but that was you, part of the Lufthansa, that heist?
No, I
I'm
actually, my office looked at the cargo building, at building 263,
right.
at the Lufthansa building. And I worked there 5 years after, you know, it was at the late 70s.
Right.
I worked in the kind of mid 80s.
So when you were there, did they talk about that at all?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but see, you got to understand the cargo area is like the Wild West, or it used to be. And it was like, you know, we had a saying: if it fell off the truck on Tuesday, we were wearing it on Thursday. You know, yeah, it was kind of like the Wild West. It was like if there was ever a damaged carton, forget it.
Right.
You know, insurance, everybody gets, you know.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it was crazy. It was crazy. I worked with guys who were clearly in the mob.
Right.
You know, and that's, you know, The Sopranos portrayed this part of it very well. They were your friends as long as you made the money.
Right.
When you didn't make them money, you weren't their friend.
Right.
So
did you ever?
So I started working in the cargo area at Kennedy, and one night a week, I had to go into the city for meetings, and there were many hours in between when I had to leave the airport and when the meetings were.
Right.
So I decided to go back to Brooklyn College and take a night class to kill some of that time, to kill like 2 hours of that time.
Right.
And the one class that's kind of interested me was American detective fiction. And the first three books we read were The Continental Op by Hammett, Farewell, My Lovely by Chandler, and The Maltese Falcon by Hammett.
Right.
And when I came home after the third book, I went to my wife and I said, this is what I was born to do.
Oh, right. Wow.
And, 6 months later, I quit my job and I've been writing ever since.
So let me ask you about that moment where you say, that's what I want. I mean, was it sort of something that you sort of, you know, over those few months you built up to it, or did you really have kind of like, because I had one of those moments in a different way earlier in my life.
I had an epiphany. I did. Yeah. I had an epiphany.
You did.
I really did.
Wow. What was that like?
Yes, and then I got arrested for it. No, I was like, you know, it wasn't like getting hit by a 2x4. It wasn't anything. It was just the realization that the poetry I had studied and learned to write and all of that, you know, I saw it in the writing of the people I was reading.
Right.
You know, poetry, like, you know, if you read the beginning of my bio, it says, called a hard-boiled poet, you know. Right. And so what I realized was you could apply the things that you learned in poetry, and it can be pretty language. You read Chandler, it's beautiful writing.
Right.
It's poetic writing.
Right.
So I thought, you know, I can do this. I can really do this. Right. And luckily, you know, my wife said, yeah, quit. I don't want you to be 50 and unhappy.
Right.
So yeah, quit your job. You know, she said yes to me twice in her life and has regretted it deeply.
Which one does she regret more?
I've been smart enough not to ask.
Good for you. All right, so let me ask you something. So you've spent your career writing crime, mystery, fiction. How much or little do you consult law enforcement professionals and or you know real life working private detectives when crafting your novels?
Yeah, you know, I have to say I know a lot of cops.
Right.
And it was more important to me at the beginning of my writing career. But I intuited early on that it wasn't about the cop stories. Like cops love to tell you, you know, anybody who knows crime fiction and knows cops love to talk. Yes. Buy them a drink. They love to tell you stories, and the stories are funny. Right. They're often very funny, but that's not what the books are made of.
Right.
What I always talk to cops about, and not ask them questions, but I would listen to what their attitudes were about their job.
Right.
Not, all the fun, this body, we found the body and pushed them in the river to the next precinct. That's an old New York City story about there was a body found in the river, and the poor body got pushed, circumnavigated Manhattan because nobody wanted to deal with it. Right. It's an apocryphal story. So yeah, it's all very funny and stuff, but that's not the thing.
Right.
That
that's not the texture of what being a cop is.
It's about how they feel
right.
about criminals, about how they feel about their families, about how they feel about the job.
Right.
That was always more important to me. You can look up laws.
Right.
You can look up procedure.
Right.
But that was the stuff that was always important to me.
Right. All right. Just a quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for Reed or myself, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So Robert B. Parker is obviously a heavyweight in crime fiction. So talk to me about how you came to write some of the Jesse Stone novels, and what was that like? I mean, did you feel pressure to live up to that legacy?
So that's like let me start.
It's a two-part question.
Yeah. No. It's so how I thought I came to write it was when Parker died. Otto Penzler, who does Mysterious Press and owns the Mysterious Bookshop, was asked by Parker's widow Joan to put together some book to honor Bob. So he asked me to be part of it. Dennis Lehane is in it, Lauren Esselman is in it, S.J. Roseanne is in it. It's a lot of, kind of well-known mystery writers are in it. And it either had to be about Spencer or about Boston or about Bob. But of course, Otto said to me, you have to write about Jesse Stone. So I wrote about Jesse Stone. And I thought when Michael, the guy who wrote him before me, I actually know him. I forget his last name now. They parted ways, and I thought, okay, my editor must have read my essay in this book. And when I first met her and they offered me the job, I said, so you read the essay? And she said, what essay?
Of course.
I said, the Jesse Stone essay. And she said, what are you talking about? She said, I've just always liked your work and thought you'd be good for this.
Right, just for those who are watching who don't know the Jesse Stone books, just quickly, who's the character?
Jesse Stone is played in the movies by Tom Selleck.
Right.
Jesse Stone is Parker's second most popular protagonist. He's a police chief in a small town in coastal Massachusetts. So now here's the second half of the question. So that's how I came to write it.
Okay. My
editor, who had been Parker's editor, liked my writing, and I was available, and they asked me, how did I come to write how was it writing the books? Well, I said yes in a nanosecond before I thought, oh my God, what am I? It's like writing Raymond Chandler's book.
Right. What did I get myself into?
Yeah, what did I get myself into? I felt like Curly in the Three Stooges. What am I doing? So I spoke to a few people who I knew who were Parker fans. And my friend Tom Schreck, a writer, said a very strange things to me. He said, Reed, I'm a big Elvis Presley fan. And I'm saying, like, what is he talking about? Okay. Like, I'm asking him about Bob Parker, and he's talking to me about Elvis Presley. And he said, the thing is this, I've seen the best Elvis impersonators in the world. And you know what? There's some stuff that no matter how good they are,
doesn't translate.
They'll never be able to A, do anything original, and B, you can't get past the fact it's not Elvis.
Right.
So when he said that, it clicked to me that I shouldn't try to copy what Parker was doing.
Do your version.
Be true to the characters,
right? But
don't try to copy Bob's style. And so once I felt an amazing relief.
Right.
When it came to that decision.
Yeah, it's got to be sort of big. Just don't do Parker's version. Do your version.
Right.
Right.
Now, Ace Atkins, my friend Ace, he had to do Spencer. It was much harder for him because it was those books are in first person.
Right.
So he had no choice.
Right.
He had to sound like Bob's voice, Spencer's voice. I didn't. So it was easier for me.
Did you?
But I didn't feel pressure, especially, what I felt pressure when they told me that all of these books always make the bestseller list.
Oh, like, oh God, now I really got to do it.
Right. So the first time I made the bestseller list, I was more relieved.
Right. Oh, thank God. Did you meet Robert Parker before?
I did.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I'm the only one who writes or has written his books who actually met him.
So what was he like?
I didn't know him. I met him at a cocktail party in a Boston bookstore.
Right.
And he was delightful, charming, I introduced myself, and this is like 10 years before I wrote the book. It's like he has no idea who I am.
Right.
Wow. I had no idea who I was,
Right, fair enough.
And he was charming, polite, had a glass of scotch in his hand, just as you would imagine him to be. So that's always my vision of Bob.
Right.
That.
Okay. So I also understand that at one point you were working with Michael Mann on a sequel to one of the all-time great crime movies, Heat, which featured Pacino and De Niro and Val Kilmer. So what happened there?
Well, I signed a non-disclosure agreement.
Okay.
So it was an honor to be considered to do it. I worked on it for about 2 years, and my colleague Meg Gardner actually wound up finishing the book with Michael. I'm sure it's a great book. We didn't work well together.
Okay.
And I know, as a matter of fact, I think I'm getting an acknowledgement in the book, but I can't really discuss it much more beyond that. But it was an honor to be connected to it, and my name was up in the lights in Times Square. So
all right, well, that's cool. So let me ask you this. So I can appreciate that you can't talk about why it didn't end up the way you wanted to, but is there anything you can share that was any takeaways, anything you could share, any anecdotes that were positive?
Not really anecdotes. And Michael's a really brilliant guy.
No.
And I loved Heat and I love Thief, but actually my favorite Michael Mann movie is The Insider.
That's a great movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
I always loved that.
Russell Crowe. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
I need to see that again.
And I did ask Michael how he got such good performances out of Al Pacino, when Pacino a lot of times, like, who am I to criticize Al Pacino's acting?
Right.
But a lot of his acting is not very restrained. But Michael, got great performances out of Al Pacino.
Yeah.
And maybe off air, I'll tell you a story.
I'm gonna that I will definitely hold you to. All right, so let me ask you. So you've written many books. So ultimately, are you more interested in telling a good mystery or focusing on character?
Character. Now, I don't mean to poo-poo plot.
Right.
Because the best characters in the world, it doesn't matter if the plot stinks.
Right.
Right. So it's like having beautiful skin with no skeleton. It doesn't work.
Right.
So I'm not poo-pooing plot. But to me, when you close a book, 2 weeks later, I'll ask you what the plot is, and you'll go,
no.
But if you remember the character, like I've always thought it was great when people said, well, how is Mo, or how is Gus? And as if they're real. So that means I've done my job. When people think about the character after the book's closed and you're not reading anymore, I think that always makes me feel good about.
Okay, that's how you stuck the landing, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. So that was great. But now we're at the time of the show where we're going to spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Play It Again, Sam, Stranger in a Strange Land, Cold Case, Music Lover, Quantum Leap, Desperately Dreaming Dexter, and Kick 'em in the Junk. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Here we go. All right. What do we got for you?
That's quite a spin there, man.
There you go. I got to make sure it gets a good, quantum leap. All right. I like this one. Okay. So you volunteer to step into the quantum leap accelerator. Only you get to pick where you go and when within your own lifetime, past, present, or future.
Within my own lifetime.
In your lifetime. What's your destination?
That is a hard question. Well, it wouldn't be my bar mitzvah.
Okay. I'll have to ask you about that one.
Yeah, it's the first time I kissed a woman seriously and felt I did it right.
The spark.
Yeah.
All right. Good one. All right. Good. Okay. So next up, we got a new section where we're going to pick your poison. We have 3 options. You got choice A, choice B, C. I'm not going to tell you what they are. Just pick one.
Well, my last name is Coleman, so I'll say C.
C. What is C? C is rejection letter. Okay. So as writers, we propose a story, we propose a novel, and unless you self-publish, which is increasingly common these days, you have to submit your idea to a publisher. Even some of the biggest authors ever, such as Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, and others, were all initially rejected. There are a lot less experienced and even accomplished authors out there who, to different degrees, struggle with rejection. So talk to me about rejection as part of the writing business.
First of all, rejection's part of life. See, this is the thing that I don't understand. No one likes rejection, right? And no one, and it's the same thing as when people say, I don't care what people think of me. Bullshit. and people say rejection rolls off my shoulders. Bullshit. But here's my what I do. I have a 24-hour rule. And luckily I don't get rejected much anymore, right? So, but early in my career, if I had time, I'd show you my my rejection folder. It's about this thick.
Sure.
You know. So I have a 24-hour rule. Any bad news in publishing is I have 24 hours to feel as shitty as I want to feel.
Right.
I don't try and talk myself out of it. I don't rationalize it. And I let myself wallow in it if I feel like it. But 24 hours to the minute, it's over. You move on.
Put a clock on it.
Yeah. It's what's the point? I mean, it doesn't feel good. So let it not feel good. You know, I've never been the kind of guy like who's a salesman who just says next. That's never been me, because that's pretending.
Right.
For me, that's pretending. So my first novel got rejected 40 times. So, you know, but it got published. So the problem with rejection, and here's a problem. You mentioned self-publishing. Right. And I think that I no longer have the real prejudice against self-publishing that I used to have. But I would say that self-publishing is too easy an option sometimes, that people, you know, get 5 rejection letters and say, screw it, I'm self-publishing. And I don't think you grow that way. So I think rejection is not fun. It's not healthy, you know, it's not great, but in some ways you can learn from rejection. And like learning from failure. And I think it's too easy an option. Like I was determined to get my book published. I was not going to self-publish it. So either that book was going to get published or I was going to write another book and that book was going to get published. And I think in some ways, the ease with which you can self-publish these days is dangerous because it's too easy. It lets people out of improving, you know, and I think, so I don't have the prejudice against it anymore, but I also think you should really, really try hard before you give up and self-publish.
I mean, that's totally fair. The flip side is that there are just fewer publishing houses out there than there used to be.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's easy for me to say.
Right,
you know, it's easy for me to say, right? I have 30 one going on 32 published novels, it's easy for me to say. I understand that.
Okay. All right. So we're getting towards the end. So now we're going to give you, and this is, I've been waiting 2 years to break out this.
Oh, by the way, I have to go. No.
You're not getting away from me just yet. So now we're going to give you some truth serum. All right. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Answer quickly. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Favorite flavor ice cream?
Vanilla.
Pineapple on pizza. Yes. Yay or nay?
Oh, no. God, no.
Okay. Anywhere in the world, bucket list destination?
Australia.
All right. Scariest movie you ever saw?
A Village of the Damned.
Okay. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Hair.
Okay. Do you play a musical instrument? And if not, which one, if you could?
If I don't, I have no talent for music at all, but I'd play the piano.
Piano. Okay. Okay. You can only have one: wealth or friendship?
Friendship.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Okay. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue. What's your choice?
Mets World Series game.
It's World Series game. Okay. All right. And finally, most impactful, where were you then moment?
Most impactful, where were you then moment? Oh, watching that guy die in front of me in Sheepshead Bay.
Okay. All right. There you go. All right. So we got a few minutes. We're going to take some questions from the audience. Let's see what we got here. Question for Reed. Will we be seeing a movie or TV show based on any of your books?
Lord, I hope so.
Okay. Okay. You got any of them, any?
Oh, there's one in negotiations now, but
right.
Once you've done this as long as I have,
Right.
I've heard that a lot. So
Right. Yeah. Okay. Another question. Whose books are you reading now that you would recommend?
I'm actually reading my friend Peter Spiegelman's book at the moment. It's called A Question Within a Question. Or is it a question about a question? It's the arc for his next book, and we're going to do some events together. And I just started reading it. And I think, there's a whole lot of people I think are underappreciated authors,
Sure.
And I think some of them are actually watching this, like Mike Wiley and Charles Salzberg, Peter Spiegelman. There's a whole list of authors I think that deserve a lot of attention that don't get it and should get it.
That's for sure. Well, that's one of the reasons why I do this show. I want to give voices to people who don't always get a shot.
Right.
All right. So another question for you. What was the other point? Oh. So you said that you were 99.4% Ashkenazi Jew. What was the other 0.6%?
Oh, Africa was, as all of us are, Africa, East African and stuff like, that basically.
Okay. So what are you working on now?
I just finished a book which won't be published, I don't think, under my name. It's I call it a woman's book club book, actually. It's a book I've wanted to write forever. It's kind of I would describe it as kind of a Bridges of Madison County for the 2020s, kind of darker, but about the relationship between two people who would seem very odd, a very odd couple.
So apparently, oh wow, it's interesting because someone had asked me if I was going to write anything outside of what I normally do. I actually, at some point in my life, I do want to write a romance novel.
Well, I wouldn't call this a romance novel, but there's romance. It centers around the relationship between two people who seem an odd match.
Right. So apparently the title of the book is, Spiegelman's book is A Secret About a Secret.
Right, A Secret About a Secret.
Okay.
He's going to kick my ass now.
Okay. All right. Well, I like to see him try. All right. So one question I didn't ask you, I wanted to before. Did you ever have any run-ins with the law yourself?
No. I'm I've done illegal things, but never had a run-in with the law. No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. So what I'm going to do now, that was great. I am now going to share my screen, and you've got some stuff to share with us, so bear with me for a second.
Sure.
Sometimes I screw this up, so I'll do my best here.
You screw up, never.
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 All right, here we go. Okay, here we go. So, all right. So what do we got? What are we looking at here?
Oh, that's I think the best thing I ever wrote. It's a book called Where It Hurts, and it is set in Suffolk County where I live.
Right.
And it was nominated for, it won the Shamus. It was nominated for the Edgar and the Thriller Award.
Wow.
And it is, I think, the best thing I ever wrote.
I gotta get a copy.
Yeah, well, Lee Child thought so. So
did you see did you watch
Jack Reed? Yeah, I did.
Did you like it?
I thought it was very much the character as opposed to Tom. I didn't hate Tom Selleck.
Right.
It's just he did not have the stature to play the character the way
No, you need to be a Hulk to play that role.
Yes. So, you know.
So what's the gist of Where It Hurts? Just give us the
Where It Hurts is it's about a retired Suffolk County cop who thinks he's got the world by the short hairs.
Right.
He thinks he understands how the world operates. You know, as most people who get good things in life think they understand the way the universe works. And he did until his son died on a basketball court of an undiagnosed heart problem. And his world just blows apart. And he winds up driving a courtesy van at a local hotel. And somebody he used to arrest comes looking to him for help.
Got it. Okay, right on. Well, all right. So you hear that, everyone? Where It Hurts. Pick up a copy. I know I'm going to order one tonight. All right. So as for me, sticking with a little our private eye themes, I'll encourage you to check out, if you want something a little bit different. If with your private eye, I'll encourage you to check out Fractured Lives, the second book in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled intergalactic private detective Angela Hardwick, part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, part Philip Marlowe. As the core mystery, Hardwick and her protege Eric Whistler are hired to find out if a galaxy-designed savant is suffering from a nervous breakdown or is the victim of the urban legend known as the Scarlet Raj, who may or may not have nefarious plans of her own. But on a more personal note, Hardwick is struggling to decide how or if she can be an effective private eye and be a good mother to her 5-year-old son, Owen. It's a grueling process for Hardwick, who may have some tough choices to make. Fractured Lives is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. And if you want a signed copy, you can order one directly from me. All right. So, Reed, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. That's our hour. And I want to thank everyone who stopped by, who's watching at home. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I'll see you all next week.
Hey, Russ, thanks a lot, man. This is great.
All right. Thanks a lot, folks. Take care now. All right. And that is our show.